Joining us now, my friend Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, a host of Fox News' fabulous weekend talk show called Huckabee, New York Times bestselling author of A Simple Government. Governor Huckabee, how are you?
I'm doing great, Laura, but I'm going to be doing better when you finally keep your promise and come do my show and play drums with my band.
Okay, I first of all
haven't done that.
Okay, we are setting a date, sir. I am absolutely writing that down in the calendar in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so it's got to be before this thing wraps up in the with the primaries. Governor, you've been around the block before when it comes to these state-by-state contests and coming up against huge money and establishment credibility. Mitt Romney came into Florida. And he was back up against the wall after South Carolina, and he wins and wins decisively among every demographic group except those who describe themselves as very conservative. What does this say?
Well, Mitt Romney clearly had an amazing night in Florida, and I think what surprised me was the margin. It was a blowout. It wasn't close. People can say it was all money. It was a lot of money because Florida is a big money state, 10 big media markets. It's very tough to win Florida without a lot of money, as Newt Gingrich found out. But the bigger issue was that against all those demographic groups, including Tea Party, women, by 22 points, even evangelicals, Mitt Romney had an exceptional night across the board, and I think there is a great momentum going out. It could have been thwarted more had Newt come out with a very different approach. And I was somewhat surprised that when he came out, it was like, first of all, he didn't acknowledge that he lost. He just took the shellacking of his life in terms of, this very prominent, spotlighted primary. And I think people were looking for the gracious Newt, the Ronald Reagan, well, by golly, we got it taken to us tonight, but we're on to the next one. Instead, it was like, I didn't get beat. Let me just tell you what I'm going to do when I'm sworn in, and let me give you now a 30-minute policy speech since I get this free airtime. I thought it was just an odd moment, and I've been at the podium, Laura, so I'm saying this as a person who's had to go to that podium and make the concession speech, and I've also been able to go to the podium, a number of times and make a victory speech on one of these primaries. And each time you have to remind yourself that the viewers at home have just seen you either win or lose. They're looking for you to be gracious if you win. They're looking for you to be magnanimous and cheery even if you lose, and also a good sport about it. And I was somewhat surprised by the tone. And I know, I get so many people who think, and even Rush Limbaugh the other day said that I had endorsed Romney. That is not true. I've not endorsed anybody, but I call it like I see it. Mm-hmm. And I've been tough on Romney when I thought he was, off the ranch. But I'll be honest with whether it's Santorum, Ron Paul, Newt Gingrich, any of them, and I'm just being honest about what I saw last night.
Well, one thing that I found interesting is that there are a number of conservatives out there who are, pretty much supporting Romney, who are watching this play out, and they think, well, maybe he should have written a whole new speech for Victory Night, and we've heard a lot of these lines before. But nevertheless, they see the inevitability of this candidate and his move to Tampa in August as the nominee, and they're still unsettled, and they can't seem to get past the fact that he is not the quote conservative nominee that they had hoped for after 3 years of Barack Obama. What do you say to those people who are still kind of, oh, well, we wish there was someone else in the race? I mean, Bill Kristol pretty much every other day is writing a column about how somebody else should get in this race.
Well, I think Bill needs to get past that and realize nobody else is likely going to get in the race. And if they do, it's not going to make things better. It's going to muddle up the works. And, the idea of let's go to a brokered convention. I mean, people need to stop, sit down, have some decaf, and think through that. Because what that would likely mean is a very fractured convention. The last one I remember that went down like that was 1976. I loved Ronald Reagan, and I was with him and supported him in 76. But it did not end well. And for those of us who, can remember those days, there's a time to say, he beat me, I'm done. Now, I don't think that time has come. Let me be very clear, and I said this last night, on Fox, is that somebody's got to get 1,144 delegates So until someone, cinches the nomination, should Gingrich and Santorum and Ron Paul hang in there? Of course they should, because it's always possible someone in front of you will implode, stumble, fall, or do something so ridiculous that they have to get out. So,
well, can't you make the argument, though, Governor, also that in 1976, that convention propelled Reagan into 1980? And that's when conservatism was really born anew for the United States. And that moment in the 76 convention where he stood and spoke and came very close to beating back the establishment and winning, if he hadn't done that, probably wouldn't have been in 1980.
Well, you could argue that was the case, although I'm not sure that it was the 76 moment. I think that Ronald Reagan built his support between 76 and 80. And then in 80, you had a field that was just lackluster, plus you had a president, Jimmy Carter, that we were so anxious to get rid of that it was just a magic moment. But going back to the point of would we be better off with a brokered convention, against a very ideological president who's going to have probably $1 billion to spend and no primary, and we would essentially then end up with a candidate who might have 2 or 3 months to put an effort together, with a media that is so in the tank. Remember, the media didn't love Jimmy Carter. They weren't really going to help him out that much. It wasn't that they loved Reagan, but they couldn't, they didn't really like him. He wasn't part of them. Obama, they're going to hug him and kiss him and make sure that he gets sweet kisses and rose petals in front of his every footstep all the way to November.
Does Romney need to do a better job, as Charles Krauthammer was alluding to last night, of sounding conservative and reaching conservatives, moving them, inspiring them?
I think he does, but he doesn't do it by trying to out-conservative conservatives. That's what hurt him 4 years ago, when he took whatever position someone had and tried to say, well, I'm even more so than him. That was what killed him 4 years ago. What I think he needs to do is to come out and say, look, I know that to some of you, I'm not conservative enough and then say the area. But here's my pledge. If I get the nomination, I will take this to victory. And if I win, I will pledge to you that here are the things that I will do. And if I don't do them, I understand you'll be upset and you won't give me another term. But here's why you can believe that I'm going to do it, because I realize our country is at stake. I think he has to address the doubts, not ignore them. It's always better if there's an 800-pound elephant in the room. First thing to do is acknowledge it. Second thing to do is shoot it and get it out of the room. And I think it's at this point that Romney, again, he's not asking me for advice. I'm giving it for free. But I think particularly as he goes into Super Tuesday in all these southern states, he's got to acknowledge the obvious, that there are lingering doubts about him among voters in the South, and he needs to address them.
Well, what does he stand for? What does he? I mean, I think this is what people were batting around last night, and callers are jamming the lines. What does Romney stand for? I
think Romney's problem is that he is an economic guy. That's his focus. He's a business guy, and that tends to be kind of a boardroom persona, not a living room persona. And what Romney has got to be able to do is to convince people in living rooms and on Main Street that he doesn't understand them as well as he wants to, but he does want to. See, I think if he comes out and tries to say, I really understand you, they'll say, no, you don't. But if he says, no, I'll be honest with you, I don't understand what it's like to wake up without a job and wonder, how will I pay the rent this month? I don't know that. But I do know this, that I will work very hard not only to understand it, but I'm going to work hard to make sure you don't wake up and worry about how to pay the rent. I think people are not looking for him to say, yeah, I know how to barbecue, a pork butt. They don't expect him to know that. In fact, they would be refreshed if he came in and said, gee, I don't know anything about that. Why don't you show me how you do that? But voters in the South are looking for the authenticity, not necessarily an identification.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, is with us. Obviously, Huckabee on the weekends at Fox News. And Governor Barack Obama has now spent the last several weeks hopscotching the United States, getting ready for a State of the Union, delivering it, and then promising the college kids in Ann Arbor he's going to lower their tuition, and then promising people with mortgages that are underwater more help, government help, and refinancing. And his wife is, God bless her, on the cover of every magazine. There's a big celebrity push for her as she goes out on the campaign trail. How do the Republicans compete against the Obama razzle-dazzle, which still carries some sway, perhaps powerful sway, with the youth vote in this country?
I think remind those youth that they are going to have a hard time getting a job when they get out of college. They're going to owe more money when they graduate than they can pay back, and they're not going to have a job in even which to pay it back. And they need to be reminded that the hope that they voted for 4 years ago has turned into hopelessness. I'd start pointing out, how much does gas cost now? How much did it cost 4 years ago? How much were simple items like milk and meat? They're substantially 50% more than they were then. Why? How much is energy costing us? These are the things that really touch people, and we can talk about hope and all of these wonderful, great, feel-good things, but in the end, people have to survive. And there are people who, when they squeeze the handle on the gas pump, they can't put more than $5 or $6 in the tank because that's all they got. And they'll have to wait until they can find another $5 or $6 and go back and do it again. And that's a scary thing for many, many people to face every single day of their lives.
Well, this economic news, Governor, is just, a disaster. This new CBO report forecasting more economic pain. It's going to get worse. Housing, the story from last year was a disaster for home sales, and now we see the real unemployment's really up at about 10% when you figure the people who've left the workforce and how the workforce itself is shrinking. This is horrible stuff for the United States of America. So I hope Mitt Romney doesn't continue to say, well, there are signs of a recovery, but it's not enough. I think this whole argument about a recovery, you go to Arkansas or Ohio and Indiana, no one's talking about a recovery there.
No, they're not. And I think the recovery, if you look at aggregate numbers and sort of big picture, are people at the top, are they kind of getting back on track? Sure they are. But are people at the bottom, are they getting ahead? No, they're not. They're actually losing ground in many cases, and the unemployment rate is an effective 17%, not the 8 or 9 that we keep hearing about, because a lot of people have just quit even looking for work. I really believe that Romney, he's made his message sort of the, opportunity society. I think that's obscure and esoteric.
No one understands that.
No one gets that. I think what he ought to be talking about, his record and what he's talked about in previous lifetimes is turnaround, whether it's the Olympics or whether it's companies that he invested in Bain Capital, or he can say that about being a governor. I think he ought to be saying this country needs a turnaround. This country has got to go a different direction. And the one thing I do, I may not be the guy that you sit in church with. I may not be the guy that you invite over to your house for coffee or beer. I may not be the guy that
who sings very well.
But then says this, but I am the guy who, when you put me in the CEO chair, I know how to turn things around, and that's what I'm asking you to give me the
turn around, Mitt. Governor, great minds think alike, because that's basically what I urged the Romney campaign to do last August. And you're a crisis guy. We're a nation in crisis. We need a good crisis manager. Period. That's what we need now. We might not have needed it in 2000, but that's what we need now.
Just like the Olympics, we were in a mess and turned it around and made champions. That's what we need in America.
Mike Huckabee, it is so great to talk to you. I'm getting my drumsticks out now. I'm going to be ready in a couple weeks. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura.